What's up? Ghost Fictions is here, and we're back again. This is the first part of a story where Izuku got the solo leveling system. He's the weakest in the world, but there's something to be said about his ability to get back up again. Alarm! You have completed all the requirements of the secret quest Courage of the Week. You have earned the right to become a player. Will you accept? But before we start, please consider subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Don't forget to check the description for more informations, and support the amazing author CrazyClouds for writing this story. Now, let's get into part 1. First, worship the Lord. Second, praise the Lord. Third, prove your faith. Midoriya Izuku stared blankly at the massive stone foot hovering over his head. Who could have faith in a lord like this? The foot descended, and the 14-year-old was turned into a bloody paste for the dozenth time. Reset. Today was not a good day. Kaken telling him to jump off a roof, a slime villain violating his body, and All Might himself revealing he was nothing more than a washed-up has-been and telling Izuku he could never be a hero on account of being quirkless. Then, to top it all off, everything came together like some sort of sick climax to a movie when Izuku tried to save Kaken from the slime villain, and they were both saved by All Might. Standing on the sidewalk, gaze firmly set on his feet, Izuku said nothing as Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft and Mount Lady all scolded him for acting recklessly, for doing what they did not, what they were too scared to do. Slowly, the young boy turned on his heel and walked away, heedless of how the heroes were yelling at him to come back. He walked and walked and walked, with no particular destination in mind. His clothes and hair reeked of sewage, ensuring nobody attempted to approach him, and the smell clogged his own nose so much he didn't notice the stench of the beach in front of him, until the gentle lapping of the waves broke him from his daze. What the hell am I doing here? He stood at the edge of the sand, just a few meters away from the rolling waterfront. If he hadn't miraculously snapped out of his daze, he probably would have been neck-deep in the ocean by now, dragged out to sea by a vicious riptide. Glancing around, he saw mountains of scrap metal and other assorted junk, piled high for as far as the eye could see. It was honestly a bit impressive that this much trash could accumulate in a place that wasn't a landfill. Then again, maybe it was a landfill, and that sign at the top of the concrete stairs saying "Welcome to Dagoba Municipal Beach" was just satire. Still, isn't this too much? Wait, is that an 18-wheeler? Izuku gaped at the truck cab casually sitting on the sand. How could something like that possibly get here? He could understand stuff washing up from the tide, or the heavier appliances being dumped here by people that lived in the area, but something like that was just. It made him feel less out of place. After all, if something as insane as a big rig could simply be parked here and forgotten about without anyone batting an eye, then couldn't the same happen to a scrawny, worthless kid? They were all trash here, nobody would even notice the difference. The events of the day finally caught up to his frail body, and Izuku couldn't fight the urge that made him sling his backpack off to the side and lay down. Without a second, or even first thought for what his mother must be thinking, Izuku drifted off to sleep. He woke up in a different place. Instead of soft, white sand under him, he felt nothing but hard stone. Confused, the green-haired boy rose into a sitting position, only to find he could barely see anything. At least, that was until the little orb of light popped into existence, flitting around his head like a pixie. Giggling at the slight tickling sensation when it passed near his nose and ears, Izuku climbed to his feet and started chasing after it, paying no mind to how childish it was. There was no one here to judge him, so what was the harm? Hey, come back! Izuku cried joyfully, laughing as his hand phased through his little friend. He stopped cold when he saw that it had led him to a massive pair of double doors. They were made of some blue stone, with an ornate, but not overdone gold trim. There were two massive knockers, about level with Izuku's head. Whoa, he breathed, slowly approaching, the pixie completely forgotten about. I've only seen doors like this in games. Is this a boss room or something? Izuku joked, chuckling to himself. Yeah, right, he snorted. That would just be ridiculous. Well, this whole situation was kinda ridiculous, but he was far past caring. Izuku just wanted to do something other than think too much, and the orb of light had provided. He laid a hand on the cold stone, and jolted back when it swung open with hardly even a push, as if the hinges had been dunked in a vat of grease. Hesitantly, Izuku tapped the other door, a bit less startled when it also moved without much resistance. Lighter than I expected stone doors of this size to be, Izuku muttered. Unless it just feels like stone, and it's actually something else? Well, whatever. The teen walked into a massive circular chamber, and two braziers lit with a ghostly blue fire. Following suit were a series of torches high up on the wall, all flickering with that eerie flame. Izuku shivered at both the creepiness, and the slight chill that permeated the room. The domed roof extended high above, almost higher than most skyscrapers Izuku had seen in the modest town of Mizutofu. Circling the edges of the chambers were a series of statues. Some wore medieval armor and were holding weapons of all sorts, while others grasped instruments in their granite hands. In the center of the room was a giant throne, and upon it sat a giant statue that made the others look minuscule by comparison. It had some odd sort of headwear on, almost like a crown, but with a lot more pointy bits. Its blank face stared above the door Izuku came through, streaks running from its eyes down to its jaws, almost like it was crying blood. "Well, this isn't weird at all," Izuku murmured sarcastically, wincing as his voice echoed through the otherwise silent room. "Where even am I?" he wondered, finally unable to ignore the oddities. "Did I get kidnapped?" He was remarkably unperturbed by that thought. Why would anyone kidnap a quirkless kid? He wasn't from a rich or famous family, so that dismissed the possibility of a ransom, and he wasn't particularly good-looking, so sex trafficking was probably out, because some people were into weird things. Was it just to do it? If so, then why would they go through all the trouble of dumping him in some cavern, instead of killing him on the spot? Did they want to bring him somewhere without witnesses? If that was the case, then where was his kidnapper? Or maybe kidnappers, plural, because he didn't even know that much. That's when Izuku noticed something. He was wearing his kakurin. That wasn't the odd part, though, because he'd been wearing it when he fell asleep on that beach. He raised a sleeve to his nose, and took a hesitant sniff. It didn't smell. He glanced at his shoulder, where Kaken had burned it, and found the burned material to be very much so not burned. Did they clean me up? He was thoroughly disturbed now. Why would his captors go through the trouble of giving him a wash and repairing his uniform? Maybe it was a trafficking ring. Izuku shuddered. At this point, the best he could probably hope for was that the person who ended up owning him wasn't too cruel. At least, no more cruel than anyone Izuku had ever met after being diagnosed as quirkless. But, until then, he'd relish in his last few moments of freedom, and explore this creepy-ass chamber. Off to the left of the huge statue, on Izuku's right, since he was standing in front of it, was another statue, but it was different from the others. Instead of a weapon or instrument, it was holding a stone tablet, with kanji inscribed into it. It had a hood instead of a head, and wings sprouted from the back of its robes. Wandering closer, Izuku peered at the tablet. Karthanon Temple's commandments, Izuku read. Is that what this place is called? Cool, he continued. First, worship the Lord. Second, praise the Lord. Third, prove your faith. Those who do not follow these commandments. The air grew chilled, and a violent shiver racked Izuku's spine. Will never return alive. Izuku swallowed thickly, his throat suddenly dry. For some reason, he dreaded the idea of turning around, but his rational mind dismissed his fear as inconsequential, and his curiosity was too strong to deny. He regretted ignoring the instinctive terror when he saw the pupils of the massive statue looking straight at him. Horror settled deep in his frame, and every single nerve in Izuku's body was screaming at him to run. To leave this room and never return, even if he had to sit in that dark cavern until he starved to death. Surely, it would be a kinder fate than whatever this malevolent being had in store for him. His feet were moving before his mind could catch up, and he was sprinting for the doors so forcefully his feet ached after the third step. He ignored the discomfort, though it was minor in the face of his terror. Terror which was amplified when he realized the doors had closed of their own volition. The pounding of his heart in his ears had been so loud, he hadn't heard the stone barrier slide back into place. But, they opened easily earlier, and there didn't seem to be any sort of locking mechanism, so all he had to do was open them again. Right, wrong. Izuku placed a hand on one of the knockers, tunnel vision almost preventing him from noticing when the statue to his right moved, swinging its spiked mace and taking his head off with a single swipe. Izuku woke with a gasp, bolting upright. His lungs rattled as he heaved, his enormous exhales making him lightheaded and blackening his vision. Eventually, he calmed down, only to almost slip into another panic attack when he noticed he was back in the chamber, sitting right in front of the angel statue that held the tablet. What? He squeaked, heavy tongue unable to properly form words. Did I just die? I just died, didn't I? I think I just died. But, how was he here, then? He felt alive. He was breathing, his blood was warm, his heart was beating. Didn't all of that mean he was still alive? So, what happened? A dream? Izuku pinched himself, wincing at how it stung. No, this was real, all right. A real-life nightmare. He stood on shaky legs, glancing warily around the room. The huge statue was still eyeing him, sending a pang of fear through his heart. The blue stone doors were still closed, still covered in blood. Wait, blood? Oh, that's my blood. Then the tears start. Loud, ugly sobs rack his frame, and Izuku wraps his arms around himself as his mind tries to piece together the events of the last few minutes. Whatever this was, it wasn't kidnapping. This was something much worse. The grinding of stone catches his attention, and Izuku's neck cracks from moving so fast, watching with muted shock as the giant statue's head turns. Its eyes glow an intense yellow, lightning crackling around its pointy crown, and all Izuku can do is look on as a beam of pure energy rockets across the room and vaporizes his upper body. Izuku wakes up screaming, arms flying up uselessly to protect himself from an attack that had already killed him. Cold sweat covers his body, and all his muscles are tense. It takes a few long moments before Izuku is able to comprehend that he's not in danger. For now. His hands drop to his side bonelessly, and his heart is palpitating so fast his chest hurts. His head moves of its own volition, and he locks gazes with the huge statue. Its eyes are no longer glowing, but streams of smoke are rising from its pupils. He glances to the side, and sees a large gouge carved in the ground, cracks running along the ground like spiderwebs, the rock glowing red-hot from the heat. Just like his first death, he hadn't imagined the second. Oh, how he wished it was all just his imagination. Keeping his focus locked on the statue, Izuku slowly begins to rise to his feet, only to fall forward when its eyes begin glowing once more. The instant his knees hit the floor, however, it stops, and resumes simply staring at him. "What?" Izuku murmurs. He attempts to stand once more, only for the entire process to repeat. "So, I'm not allowed to stand? Or, I'm not allowed to go past a certain height?" He glances at the crimson stain on the double doors, and the blood splattered across one of the knights guarding it, the same one that had decapitated him. His fists clenched. "And I'm not allowed to touch the door. What the hell am I supposed to do? Those who do not follow the commandments. What were they?" Izuku glanced back at the tablet-holding statue. "First, worship the Lord. And I'm willing to bet that big guy's the Lord. Worship? I'm not allowed to leave. That means I can't turn my back on him. I'm not allowed to get up. That means I have to stay on my knees. There must be more than that, though? What's more worshipful than kneeling? Groveling?" It was the only idea he had. Izuku breathed in deeply, then lowered his forehead to the stone, flinching a bit at how cold it was, but otherwise not moving. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15, and a creaking noise grinded against Izuku's eardrums. He forced himself to stay put for a little while longer, before finally working up the courage to raise his head. Holy shit, the Lord was smiling. It was not a pleasant smile. Stone lips pulled across the width of its face, exposing every single one of its flat teeth and plenty of its gums. This was the type of smile that would hurt the face of a normal person, but the Lord only looked satisfied. Izuku had to resist the urge to empty his bladder in his pants. Okay, that worked, I guess," Izuku mumbled to himself. That was the first commandment. The second was to praise the Lord, but how dash? The chamber rumbled. Bits of rock fell from the ceiling, and Izuku's pulse began racing. He watched with terror as the Lord rose from his throne, stretching to his full, immense height. He's taller than Mount Lady. She's 20 meters tall in her giant mode, and he's nearly twice that. What the F dash? The Lord was moving. Walking. He was heading right for Izuku. And no. Wait, no, stop. He teetered backwards and landed on his ass, scuttling backwards like a crab. "Don't come closer. Stay away. Stop." The Lord squashed him underfoot like an insect. Izuku woke up choking on his saliva. He rolled to his hands and knees, hacking violently. It passed eventually, but his throat was left sore. That was forgotten a moment later, when he realized the ground under him was wet and red. He woke up in a puddle of his own blood. Acid flowed up his esophagus, forcing its way out of his mouth and splashing into the crimson lake, causing some of it to splash back onto Izuku's face. A trembling arm came up, index and middle finger touching the liquid on his cheek. Instead of wiping it off, though, it felt like all he did was smear it around. He pulled his hand back, and stared at his bloody palm. Something in his mind snapped. Ah. His hoarse screams echoed throughout the chamber. Izuku scrambled to his feet, only to slip on the slick granite and fall face-first into the puddle, his nose crunching harshly. The ichor was still warm, covering the green-haired boy in a sickly heat. He curled up in a ball, covered in his own life liquid, and began to sob. Why? Why is this happening to me? I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go home. I'll deal with Kaken for the rest of my life. Mom, All Might, someone, save me. Izuku woke up an unknown amount of time later. He'd cried himself empty, before exhaustion, both physical and mental, knocked him out. Dried tears and crusted blood flaked off his cheeks, and his broken nose twinged painfully, but Izuku was just too drained to care. He pushed himself upright, looking around the room to reacquaint himself with his current situation, only to notice the Lord's eyes glowing. Oh, sh. Izuku woke up rather calmly. Fuck, I forgot about that, he muttered. Does it reset every time? I didn't think it did, since he was looking at me after the second death, he finished, forcing his brain to come to terms with reality. He died 4 times. Yet, he was still alive. Okay, so first, worship the Lord. Izuku crawled into a grovel, forehead touching the chilly floor. He waited until he heard that creaking noise, indicating that the Lord was smiling, before both of them got to their feet. Now, praise the Lord. What does that mean? For now, he had to avoid the walking behemoth until he figured something out. He eyed the smaller knights lining the perimeter of the chamber, remembering how the one next to the door had violently murdered him the first time. Should probably stay away from the ones with weapons, he murmured. Praise doesn't actually mean praise, right? You have, really nice teeth, Izuku called, as he began jogging a loop around the room. The Lord didn't seem to move very fast, but his steps were powerful enough to fracture the ground, so Izuku had to make sure to stay a certain distance away, or the shockwaves would unbalance him. He also needed to stay away from the knights, or they would eviscerate him. His feeble attempt at complimenting the stone giant went ignored. Figures. That would have been too easy. It was on his second loop around the chamber that Izuku found a problem with his current strategy, namely, the craters in the floor required him to make wider turns to avoid stepping in one and twisting his ankle, bringing him close to the guards. Of course, by the time he realized this, a knight with a sword was bearing down on him, hefty blade poised to bisect him vertically. Son of a dash. 5 deaths. Can't touch the door. Can't stand before I worship the Lord. Izuku quickly performed the necessary grovel. He rose quickly afterwards, casting his gaze around the chamber for perhaps the 100th time, looking for something he might have missed. Can't run. Can't go near the statues with weapons. What about the ones with instruments? Izuku made a beeline for the nearest angel. This one had a horn of some sort, which looked rather similar to a saxophone. When he came within a meter of its base, the angel started playing a bass-heavy melody, which reverberated deep within Izuku's skeleton. Okay, that sorta worked. Do I have to activate all of them? He wondered. The Lord was still moving, so maybe. It looked like there were 3 knights between each angel, and 12 angels around the chamber, meaning that he had to avoid 36 guards. Plus the Lord. Couldn't forget the big bastard stomping around. Alright, Izuku breathed, trying to pump himself up. Let's do this. He took off in an explosive sprint, activating the bugle, drum, and lyre angels in quick succession. His luck ran out, though, when he came into the crosshairs of a guard with a bow. He wasn't even near it, but the damn thing knocked an arrow, pulled back the string, and let loose. The arrow ripped a hole straight through his stomach, and Izuku fell to the ground. He would have bled out in a minute or less, if the Lord hadn't caught up and stomped him into a red paste. 6. Something was different about this time, though. Music was still playing throughout the chamber, and the Lord was already standing. Don't have to worship him anymore, huh? Izuku asked, climbing to his feet and taking off. This time, he got to the violin angel, before he made another mistake. Following the 3-knight 1 angel pattern, Izuku gave 3 of the statues a wide berth, only to realize that the 4th wasn't an angel at all. Instead, it was a knight with a shield. Izuku desperately attempted to launch himself backwards, but the stone warrior slammed its tower shield on his left leg, crushing his kneecap and cutting off everything below. Izuku shrieked in agony, hands hovering over the amputated limb. Blood gushed like a fountain, quickly covering the ground in shining crimson. The guard took a step forward, and Izuku's survival instincts kicked in, forcing him to drag himself backwards despite the pain screaming through his nerves. He shimmied and jerked and tossed himself as far from the shield bearer as he could, only to notice a moment too late that there was a rapidly growing shadow over his mangled body. He glanced up, just in time to be stepped upon by the Lord. The bow-wielding knight got him again, this time a bit higher. His heart was destroyed instantly. The Lord stomped harder than normal, causing Izuku to misstep and get in range of a guard holding a glaive. It slashed him diagonally across the torso, then bisected him horizontally while he lay bleeding on the ground. The archer almost got him, but Izuku finally dodged the stone arrow by diving out of the way, only for a warhammer to descend upon his head. Naginata. Sword. Spear. Dead, dead, dead. 16, if he counted right. 16 times he was cut down, crushed, shot, bludgeoned, or otherwise killed in a manner most brutal. His blood was splattered around the room in so many places, across so many stone weapons. For all that he died, though, Izuku had been making progress. He'd activated 10 out of 11 angels, since one of them was actually the shield bearer. All that was left was the one holding an open book, the choir singer. It was directly across the room from him, behind the Lord, and right next to the archer. The 2 biggest pains in the ass. God, this is bullshit, Izuku growled, bending his knees and preparing for his reckless rush. It might have just been his imagination, but it felt like his legs were moving just a little faster, his reaction time just a little quicker. Bursting into motion, Izuku easily skirted around the close-range knights, barely giving the Lord more than a passing glance. It was when he made it past the throne that the archer noticed him. Quickly knocking an arrow, it let loose the devastating projectile, only for Izuku to roll underneath it. A grin stretched across his face, unbidden, and the green-haired teen whooped triumphantly. By the time the archer knight had drawn back for another shot, Izuku was diving for the base of the choir singer. He came up in a roll, nearly braining himself on the angel's solid legs, but he didn't care. He'd made it. A haunting, ominous warble came streaming from the choir singer's mouth, but it only filled Izuku with relief, because it obviously seemed to calm the Lord. It stopped stomping around, and instead turned to a golden circle in the ground, in front of the throne. Raising its arms, 2 circular pedestals rose, the one on the inside higher than the outside. An altar? Izuku realized, blood running cold. Like from mythology, where they sacrificed living beings to appease their lord. Cows, pig, sheep, children. The 3rd commandment. Prove your faith. The Lord stared down at him expectantly. And no, I won't. The Lord took a menacing step forward. Izuku took 3 back. Stop. The Lord's horrendous smile stretched impossibly wider. I dash. Dead. Again. 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 How many times had he died now? At least 30, maybe 40. Izuku didn't really know. He hadn't moved in the past 5 or so resets, something, to even be bothered. He didn't even flinch as the Lord's enormous bare foot was raised over his spread-eagled body. Dead? 100. Probably. Izuku didn't have many positive traits. He didn't have a quirk. He wasn't the smartest kid around, as evidenced by Bakugo always taking first place in their class. He definitely wasn't the strongest, if his bony body was any indication. But Izuku thought he had willpower. So many people had told Izuku he couldn't become a hero. His doctor, Bakugo, everyone in school. His own mother didn't believe in him. Instead of comforting him, at least lying to him that he could be a hero, she broke down crying, wailing apologies over and over and over. That's not what I wanted you to say, Mom. That's not what you were supposed to say. Still, Izuku persevered. He went into hero and quirk analysis. He learned how to break down a person's skills, their strengths and weaknesses, with just a scant few glimpses of their quirk, because in this day and age, almost everyone's fighting style revolved around their quirk. Counter the quirk, and they become fodder. He kept going. Izuku couldn't keep going now. He was, broken sounded too cliché. No, he was completely fucking wasted. The Lord's foot descended once more. So much for willpower. Occasionally, he would fade back into lucidity. Not enough to put together coherent thoughts, but he could at least process the world around. Or rather, the hell around him. There was so much blood. Sometimes, Izuku woke up drowning. Most of the time, he didn't even remember waking up. He died so many times, in this exact same position, that it was all starting to blur together. It was like someone was rewinding his life, and then pressing play, only to do it again and again. He woke up. He was killed by the Lord. He woke up again. Rinse and repeat. Izuku wondered if maybe he was going insane. Well, of course he was. Nobody could stay sane after being stomped to death hundreds of times. What happened to being a hero? Saving people with a smile on my face? Just like All Might? No, fuck All Might. I'll be my own type of hero. For the first time in over 1,000 resets, Midoriya Izuku stood up. He waded through a crimson ocean, and stepped up onto the lower concentric layer, dripping ichor like an overdone horror movie. He stared down at the intricate design on the altar, focused around some sort of malformed sun. Whoosh! Orange fireballs burst into existence, forming a ring around him. Then, from them, blue lines shot out across the ground, evaporating the blood on it and exposing the stone floor for the first time in a while. Another ring of flames appeared, though these were blue, smaller, and more numerous. Then, on the other side of the chamber, the doors swung open. Izuku blinked, staring at the gates of hell. It didn't even take him a second to dismiss the possibility of rushing through with as much speed as he could muster. There was no way it wasn't a trap. Instead, he was much more focused on the statues of the knights, who began grinding into motion, stepping slowly but surely towards the altar. The beginnings of dread welled up in his heart, but Izuku crushed it down ruthlessly. There was no place for fear here. Not anymore. Prove your faith. This was just another trial. Another way to strike terror into him. It wouldn't work if Izuku didn't let it. The blue flames were slowly flickering out. A timer, he realized. With each azure will-o-wisp that vanished, the doors inched closer and closer to shutting, probably for the rest of eternity. Prove your faith. More tricks. More things for him to ignore. The knights crept ever closer. All except the archer, who remained where it was, frozen in place. This confirmed Izuku's theory that the Lord didn't actually want him dead now. Otherwise, there would have been an arrow lodged in his chest at the moment. Izuku's gaze idly passed across the room, and he noticed something rather interesting. The statues in his line of sight stopped moving. He could hear the others moving, the creaking of their granite joints grating on his ears, but the ones directly in front of him paused. Izuku chuckled. What is this, red light, green light? He joked morbidly. Then, because he was bored, he began spinning in place, slowly casting his sight upon every statue. Each time they halted, it took them a moment or two to start moving again, only to freeze up again when Izuku completed another revolution. The green-haired boy couldn't help the laugh that bubbled out of his throat. "I feel like Eraserhead," he murmured with a grin. The underground hero who could erase the quirks of anyone in his line of sight, the effects of which were broken whenever he blinked. The timer ticked down. The door shut. The statues burst into motion. Wadash! A spear pierced clean through his shoulder, pinning him to the floor below, before being brutally ripped upwards. The momentum flung Izuku into the air, and he landed back first on the altar. His blood seeped into the carvings below him, wetting the stone and filling the air with an even more pungent scent of iron. "Urgh!" Izuku groaned, the pain sending supernovas through his neurons. For all the times he died, most of them were instant. He still wasn't quite used to this sort of torture. It didn't stop the red smile that his lips formed. "Prove your faith. Is this the end? Will I actually die this time?" A guard with a curved blade scimitar stepped forward, raising its cruel weapon high into the air. His smile became weak, then disappeared altogether. I don't want to die." The sword descended. "I want to become a hero." Closer and closer it approached, like a guillotine. "I want to see Mom again." Time froze. "I want just one more chance. Please." Ding. Alarm. "You have completed all the necessary requirements of the secret quest. Courage of the weak. You have earned the right to become a player. Will you accept?" Izuku woke up in the hospital. His heavy eyelids parted to reveal the fluorescent lights and white tiles overhead. He groaned at the brightness, shutting his eyes once more. "Izuku, are you awake?" That was his mom. And suddenly, the slight discomfort didn't matter. He forced himself into a sitting position, idly noting that he wasn't sore in the slightest. "Mom, oh, my baby," Midoriya Inko cried, drawing her son into a crushing embrace. She squeezed him a bit too tight to be comfortable, but he just squeezed her right back. She pulled away a moment later, holding him at arm's length and checking him over. "How do you feel? Does anything hurt? Are you tired? You can sleep more if you want," Inko rattled out. Izuku smiled softly. "I'm fine, Mom. I think I've slept enough. Why am I in the hospital?" Tears began leaking from the woman's eyes, a sign of the impending flood. "I got a call from the hospital saying that someone found you passed out on Dagoba Beach, covered in blood. You've been asleep for 3 days, Izuku. What happened?" 3 days? Damn. And I was covered in blood, huh? Looks like it really wasn't a dream. Then again, he glanced at the blue, crystalline screen hovering in front of him, which his mother couldn't seem to see. "I guess that should have been proof enough." "I don't really remember," Izuku lied. "I was just really tired after." "The slime villain? I saw it on the news and don't think I won't be talking to you about that, young man," Inko said sternly. Izuku just grinned. "Yeah, that. I was just really tired, and I guess I wasn't paying attention to where I was walking. And I ended up on the beach. I laid down for a nap, then I woke up here." Inko's eyes softened. "Well, I guess I can't blame you too much. The police wanted to send a detective to talk to you, but you don't have to if you don't want to." Izuku tilted his head. "Yeah, I think that might be too much." Inko nodded, having expected as much. "All right, I'm going to call the police station and tell the doctors that you woke up, okay, baby? If you need anything, just ring one of the nurses," she said, pointing at the call button. Izuku smiled broadly at her, and a good portion of the stress in Inko's shoulders melted away. "I love you, sweetie. I love you too, Mom." The green-haired woman walked out of the room with a final wave, and Izuku turned his attention to the screen. Message. "You have 2 unread messages. Is this like email? Open inbox. Inbox. Welcome, player, unread. Daily quest, preparing to become strong, has arrived, unread. Read welcome, player. Alarm. The E-system will help the player's growth. If he fails to obey the E-system's orders, there may be a penalty." Izuku's eyebrows furrowed. "What is this, a video game? Open daily quest. Quest directions. Daily quest, preparing to become strong. Goal. Incomplete, push UPS 0/100. Incomplete, sit UPS 0 out of 100. Incomplete, squats 0 out of 100. Incomplete, running 0/10 km. Warning, failure to complete this daily quest will incur a penalty." "Is this a joke? There's no way I can do this much," Izuku complained. "Even if I wasn't in the hospital, I don't have the stamina to run 10 kilometers. At that moment, the door slid open, and in walked a man wearing a white coat. Probably the doctor. Izuku waved away the quest screen. He'd deal with it later. Alarm. You have not completed the daily quest. You will now be sent to the penalty zone for a certain period of time. A centipede. A massive, desert-dwelling insect with vicious mandibles, a worm-like tongue, and hundreds of sharp appendages. Poison Fang giant sand centipede. An apt description, if Izuku had ever seen one. Quest directions. Penalty quest, survive. Goal: incomplete, survive until time runs out. Time required, 4 hours. Time remaining, 3 hours 59 minutes and 57 seconds. The centipede began salivating, impatient to bite into Izuku's scrawny body and devour him, picking his bones clean with relish. You've gotta be kidding. Izuku groaned mournfully. Looks like he was in for a lot of running. Fuck 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 dash. Izuku chanted, sprinting through the sands, ignoring how scraped up his bare feet were becoming. He could barely breathe, and the sweltering heat beating down on his head was not helping. A half-dozen centipedes were now chasing after him, and Izuku had no clue how he'd managed to keep moving for so long. It was probably the cocktail of adrenaline and fear coursing through his veins. Either way, after this, he'd probably have no problem running 10 kilometers. If he survived, of course. The portal chose that moment to open in front of him. Izuku spilled onto the floor of his hospital room, sand covering the tiles around him. He panted loudly, trying and failing to get enough oxygen in his aching lungs. Alarm. You have completed the key penalty quest. Message. Your rewards for completing the penalty quest have arrived. Would you like to accept? Izuku's head hit the linoleum floor in a dead faint. Izuku was released from the hospital in the morning. Despite the disastrous scene that a nurse had walked in on last night, there wasn't actually anything wrong with him. The doctors recommended that he stay another day for observation, but Izuku begged his mother to sign the release forms, and she eventually caved. A few hours later, he'd finished 3/4 of the daily quest, eager to never be sent to that stupid penalty zone again. All that was left was the 10-kilo run. It was a bit of a surprise that his mother was letting him leave the house at all after what happened, but he wasn't going to question it. Clad in his mint green tracksuit and red sneakers, Izuku took off down the road in a light jog. He just needed to finish the daily quest before midnight. He could take as long as he wanted. Plus, his mom was keeping him home from school for the next week, so he could spend a few days getting used to this new workout regimen. I wonder why the requirement seemed so familiar. It was done. He'd finished the run in under 2 hours, which was quite the pleasant surprise. He was now sitting on the bench in a park near his apartment, staring at the blue screen in front of him. Alarm. You have completed the daily quest. Message. Your rewards for completing the daily quest have arrived. Would you like to accept? Yes, Izuku muttered, keeping his voice low so people walking by wouldn't think he was completely crazy. Quest rewards. Claim your rewards. 1. Status recovery. 2. Stat points plus 3. 3. Random box plus 1. These are the same as the ones for the penalty quest, Izuku noted. Status recovery. A golden light enveloped Izuku, burning away his fatigue and replacing it with a deep-seated sense of satisfaction at being rewarded for his actions. Stat points. Random box. The box appeared in his inventory, and the points were added to the 3 he'd already received from the penalty quest. Status. Status. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Level, 1. Job, none. Title, none. Fatigue, 0. HP, 100. MP, 10. Strength, 10. Agility, 10. Vitality, 10. Intelligence, 10. Sense, 10. Remaining points, 6. Izuku hummed thoughtfully. It looked like the only way to increase his stats was through getting these points and, he assumed, leveling up. Otherwise, he would have gotten at least 1 strength during that grueling exercise routine. With the daily quest, though, he would have a constant source of points. It might not be a lot, but 3 per day for a month would result in 90 points, which was definitely an improvement. And that was just assuming he didn't level up at all. The U.A entrance exam was in 10 months. If each month averaged 30 days, that was around 300 days, and at 3 stat points per day, he would be able to increase his overall ability by 15 times, considering he had 60 points invested in all his stats at the moment, and would gain 900 by the time the exam rolled around. So, he didn't feel that bad about putting all 6 free points in strength, to make the daily quest easier tomorrow. The stats didn't mirror real life. Instead, they seemed to simply be set at a common baseline. Izuku knew he was more intelligent than he was strong, yet both started at 10. Well, whatever the case, all that was left to do was improve them. For now, he'd focus on strength and agility, moving on to sense and vitality, while leaving intelligence for last. Physical ability was vital for the practical exam, and he was confident that he'd at least be able to eke out a pass on the written portion. Just because he wasn't number 1 in their class didn't mean that the number 2 spot was worthless. Many others would disagree, based solely on the fact that Izuku was the one holding it, but fuck them. He didn't die over 1,000 times to come listen to a bunch of clowns. Inventory. Izuku reached into the blue screen and pulled out the random box, accepting the prompt to open it. The first one gave him a roll of bandages, which could be useful in the future. This one gave him a pen. Izuku stared at it blankly. Well, at least I won't have to spend as much on office supplies, he murmured, shoving the writing utensil in the pocket of his tracksuit. He stood from the bench, stretched his arms over his head, and began the jog back home, noting how much easier his body moved with only 6 more points in strength. He smiled. With this, I can be a hero. Saturday. I'm going out, Mom. Izuku called into the house. Be safe, sweetie. Inko called back. She was still a bit nervous about letting him leave, but nothing had happened at all these past few days, and Izuku was actually doing better than ever. He smiled more around her, and he was really starting to shape up, thanks to his hellish workout. Inko was seriously starting to consider joining him. Years of stress eating and worrying over her poor, delicate son had taken its toll on the mother. It didn't help that her husband hadn't contacted them in years, simply sending money. At the very least, it was in excess of the court-mandated child support fees, but Inko wasn't sure if it was because Hisashi still cared, or if it was just guilt at abandoning his old family. There was no doubt in Inko's mind that her ex-husband had found another woman. Yes, Inko resolved herself, she'd begin working out, both to get herself in shape, and to spend more time with her son, who she'd lost over the years. Item, Dungeon Key. Item class, E. Type, Dungeon Key. A key that allows you to create an instant dungeon. You may use this at the 3rd entrance of Mizurufu Station. Well, here I am, Izuku muttered. An E-rank key probably means an E-rank dungeon, which tend to be the lowest rank in most games. Right now, I'm probably an E-rank player, too, he grimaced. The odds weren't good, but the chance to level up in this dungeon was too good to pass up. Here goes nothing. Izuku held the key up to the empty air in front of the descending staircase, and watched as it began to glow. A blue distortion hung in the air, and Izuku took 2 steps forward, entering the dungeon. It was an odd sensation, like he was being squeezed through a tube that was just a little bit narrower than him. Slightly uncomfortable, but overall not too bad. Alarm. You have entered an instant dungeon. Behind him, some sort of blue, crystalline stone began materializing in the air, blocking up the entrance. Izuku watched as it was completely closed off. Looks like I'm not leaving through there. A woman on her phone walked up the stairs beside Izuku, passing through the barrier as if it wasn't even there. Izuku blinked, then placed a hand on it. It was solid to him. Is this some sort of pocket dimension? He mused. It was a bit frightening to think of, that the system could do things like this. Then again, people with warp quirks existed, even if they were a bit on the rare side. If he rationalized this as a warp quirk that he couldn't really control, it was easier to deal with. Alarm. You cannot leave the instant dungeon. Either kill the boss, or use a hearthstone to escape. Hearthstone. Hearth means home, so is it some sort of item that can teleport you out of dungeons? An ominous breeze whistled up the stairs, carrying with it a malevolent aura. Izuku shivered a bit, but steeled himself. This was nothing compared to the Karthanon temple. At least here, he might actually have a chance to fight back, instead of dancing to the tune of the cruel lord like a damned puppet. He gritted his teeth at remembering how helpless he was in that place, how pathetic he was, breaking down like that. That won't happen ever again. I'll become strong enough that it can't happen. And that means I'll have to kill these monsters? Or they'll kill me. He wandered down the steps into the underground market that led to the subway. The shops were all closed up, metal shutters and cages blocking their entrances. Weeds grew between moldy floor tiles. The fluorescent lights overhead were varying states of disarray, but enough of them worked that he could still see. He'd need to start keeping a flashlight and some spare batteries in his inventory for when it got too dark. A strong scent tickled Izuku's nose. It smelled kind of like raw meat, but more pungent, rancid. A growl resounded from the darkness, and a giant, red-furred wolf came barreling down the corridor, a feral look in its glowing red eyes. Izuku caught sight of the monster's red name tag before it pounced. Steel Fang Raiken. The boy quickly twisted to the side, easily avoiding the monster since it couldn't maneuver in the air. As it passed, Izuku caught a glimpse of the metal wrapped around its lower jaw, like armor. Steel Fang, huh? Fitting, I guess. Wolf-type enemy. Sharp claws, strong legs, and its bite is probably its best weapon. Canines have sensitive noses, so I should aim for the snout. Tail pulling might be a good distraction. Boy and wolf stared each other down from the hallway, until the beast lost its patience and once more rushed him. Izuku was ready to slide to the side again, only to find himself frozen in place. Why can't I move? Am I scared? Distracted as he was, he could only tilt his head to the side when the Riken lunged, its powerful jaws clacking shut right next to his ears. Izuku followed through the motion, falling out of the way of the claws that threatened to slice him to ribbons. His palm instinctively slapped against the ground, pushing him into a handstand. Dumbfounded, the green-haired teen lost his balance, landing on his shoulders with his ass in the air. How did I do that? He pushed himself into the air using nothing but his arms, easily clearing double the Riken's height. The beast slammed into the shutter he had been leaning against just a moment ago. My body feels so light. Is it because I've been putting all my points in strength? Izuku landed in a crouch, straightening up as the wolf dug itself free from the metal it crashed into, glaring at him hatefully. It charged once more, but this time, Izuku didn't freeze. Instead, he reared back with a fist, and slammed it straight into the steel Fang Riken's black nose. With a whimper, the wolf went flying back into the same shutter, bending the metal like a meteor hit it. Izuku stared at his outstretched hand in shock. This is 19 strength? It's more powerful than most physical enhancement quirks. The steel Fang Riken stood up once more, but it seemed dazed, stumbling about awkwardly and tripping over its four legs. Unwilling to give up the advantage, Izuku approached it cautiously, wary of it freaking out and suddenly slashing him. Instead of blindly attacking, though, it fell over. Izuku leaped on the opportunity, and slammed a fist into the monster's skull. Once, then twice, then 3 times, each heavy blow rattling his opponent's skull. Finally, on the 5th strike, bone gave way, and Izuku's fist ended up buried wrist-deep in the Riken's lupin brain. The boy grimaced as he wiped his stained fingers on the dead beast's fur, then took a step back, shaking out his stinging knuckles. I killed it, but... He stared at the deep crimson on the back of his hand. It's not my blood. Not my blood, not my blood, not mine, not mine, not mine, not. He clenched his fists. That was too inefficient, he mumbled. Wolves usually hunt in packs. Encountering a lone one like this was probably a rare occurrence that I shouldn't count on. Trying to brute force my way through this dungeon isn't going to work. Punching it in the nose worked well to stun it, but I doubt I'll be able to do it to all of them. I need to aim for more vulnerable spots. Joints are no good, because it'll put me too close to the claws. I might be able to dig out a few of their eyes, but those are small targets, and the focus required for that level of precision might make me vulnerable to the rest of the Rikens. I should have put a few more points into sense to increase my reflexes and reaction time, but then I might not have even been able to kill this one. What should I do? Izuku's lips twisted around a few times, unable to decide what expression to make. Finally, he groaned frustratedly. This would probably be so much easier if I had a weapon, he murmured. Ding! Alarm. You have defeated Steel Fang Riken. Alarm. You have leveled up. Izuku blinked. Really? It only took 1 kill to level up? Status. He took a moment to peruse his increased stats. Looks like everything increases by 1. I get 3 points from the daily quest, and 5 from leveling up. His health had also increased to 205, from the original 100. He tilted his head in consideration. So either 1 vitality gives 100 HP, and level up gives another 5, or it's the other way around. I'm leaning more towards the first, since otherwise there'd be no point in raising vitality, because the only way to increase HP would be by leveling up. Message. Your rewards for defeating Steel Fang Riken have arrived. Would you like to accept? Accept. Item, Riken's Fang, 3. Item class, E. Type, Material. A large and sharp fang of a Steel Fang Riken. You can sell this item in the Yi store. Izuku held the metal tooth in one hand, tapping his chin with the other. Material, huh? Does that mean there's a crafting system? Would I be able to make a weapon out of this stuff? Message. A new quest has arrived. Quest directions. Crafting quest. Goal. Incomplete, collect 20 Riken's fangs to craft a weapon, 3/20. That's convenient. Does the system respond to my needs? Well, if it can make pocket dimensions like this place and the penalty zone, then I guess it's pretty easy to do something like this. Also, what's the store? Another screen popped up, this one listing a large amount of items. Izuku scrolled through them for a moment, before dismissing it. I don't have enough money to buy any of that stuff. Surprisingly enough, the store used yen, but Izuku's paltry allowance had mostly gone towards hero merch. He was probably going to sell that stuff soon. Looking at it left a bad taste in the back of his throat, as if bile was trying to fight its way out of his stomach. It was not a pleasant sensation when one was trying to sleep. Izuku shook his head. Now wasn't the time to think about trivial things like that. He could hear the clacking of nails on tile, the growls of more wolves approaching as they smelled the blood and gore of their brethren. Izuku inhaled, then exhaled deeply, centering himself. He opened his eyes, and saw about 24 Rikens loping down the hall, snarling at him. Fiercely. The pack howled as one, their intention to hunt clear. Fight fiercely. Izuku roared right back. Alarm. You have leveled up. 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 Alarm. You have completed the key crafting quest. Message. Your rewards for completing the crafting quest have arrived. Would you like to accept? Accept, Izuku panted, lungs burning. Quest rewards. Claim your rewards. 1. Kiba. 2. Crafting recipe, Kiba. Accept all? Light flashed, and suddenly, Izuku was holding a sword in his hand. It was a slim, double-sided blade akin to a saber, with 2 curved protrusions, one near the top of the blade, and one more towards the middle. They were shaped like the fangs of the Raikens, hence the name. This is going to help a lot, Izuku muttered, dragging the blade along the floor behind him. Item, Kiba. Item class, E. Type, sword. Attack, +5. A sword made from Raiken fangs. Leveling up reduced his fatigue, which was the only thing that had kept him going during that fight. His strength was now at 25 and the rest of his stats at 15. Every point helped, Izuku had realized. He was dodging faster, moving easier, hitting harder. He'd need it if he was going to kill the boss. The scraping of his sword on the stone echoed through the halls, and Izuku wasn't surprised when he turned a corner to find dozens upon dozens of Raikens waiting for him at the subway's turnstiles. Something was different, though. Their name tags were white. Alarm. You have earned the title, Wolf Slayer. Title, Wolf Slayer. A. Title, given to a hunter proficient in defeating wolves. 40% increased stats when fighting against beast-type monsters. A monkey from above, and a cat from each side. He thrust his sword straight up, impaling the razor claw Briga, then ripped the blade out sideways, bringing it down upon the left Black Shadow Raisin's head, cleaving its skull in 2. Continuing the motion, he whirled around, decapitating the remaining cat. 3 corpses hit the ground at the same time. Izuku flicked the blood off the Kiba. I'm not getting any more experience from these monsters, he muttered. That's probably because their name tags are all white now. Color must mean their difficulty level. The Raikens used to be orange, meaning medium, and the centipedes from the penalty zone were all red hard. Status, level, 15. HP, 1570. MP, 150. Strength, 33. Agility, 24. Vitality, 24. Intelligence, 24. Sense, 24. My stats have risen so much, but I don't know if I'll be able to handle whatever's down there. He stood at the top of the staircase descending to the subway tunnels. An intense pressure floated up to brush against him, trying to creep into his lungs and strike fear into his heart. Izuku tightened his grip on the leather-wrapped hilt of the Kiba. There's no choice. I won't get stronger by fucking around up here. Let's get this over with, he whispered. He began the long, longer than he remembered journey to the bottom of the dungeon, and stared at the ruins he found himself in. Is this really Muzudafu Station? He murmured, observing the flora sprouting up all over the place, and the water flooding the ground. It looked like a swamp. It was only because his sense was so high that he managed to raise the Kiba in time to block the attack that slammed into him from out of nowhere. It was far stronger than him, though, so the only thing Izuku could do was keep his sword between him and whatever this thing was. It slammed him into a wall so hard the concrete cratered, and Izuku hacked up blood. The green-haired boy fell to the floor, coughing harshly, lungs spasming. His right hand felt light. He looked down, and the Kiba was snapped in half. I would have died if that hit me head-on. He climbed to his feet, leaning heavily against the shattered wall. I thought I got stronger, but your name's still Orange. Swamp's ruler, Blue Poison Fangs Rasaka. The boss. It was a giant, blue-scaled snake, with glowing orange eyes. Its long, forked tongue flickered out, tasting his despair and savoring his trepidation. It unhinged its jaws and roared at him, exposing fangs longer than the Kiba when it was whole. A sword won't pierce those scales. Punches won't work, either. My only choice is to aim for the 2 exposed soft spots, the eyes, and inside the mouth. He discarded his broken blade and leaped out of the way of a tail swipe, only for Rasaka's serpentine body to slam down in front of him, blocking any further retreat. The tail caught up, and Izuku barely spun out of the way, the scales grinding against his skin. Miraculously, he wasn't gutted like a fish, but it still hurt. The front of his tracksuit was now sporting a huge gash, but Izuku ignored it. Craft Kiba, he shouted, hoping the system would activate. A moment and a flash of light later, a new sword appeared in his hand, just in time for him to deflect another pass by Rasaka's scale. It took all his strength, and then some, but he managed to angle the snake's body away from him, giving himself a bit of breathing room. He vaulted over another segment of the boss' thick body, using his as a launching pad to leap for its head. With a roar of exertion, he flipped his grip on the kiba, holding it like an ice pick, and jammed it straight into Risaka's left eye. The serpent roared out a grating hiss, thrashing wildly and dislodging Izuku, who managed to keep his grasp on his weapon. The teen went skidding along the ground, rolling a few times before he finally stopped himself, flipping to his feet. He ignored the aching in his body with years of practice due to being bullied relentlessly, and watched as Risaka stopped flailing. The monster glared hatefully at the one who took half its sight. With a seething rumble, the snake darted at Izuku, who set his stance and stood his ground, holding his sword in front of him, both hands wrapped tightly around the hilt, waiting for the perfect opportunity. It came moments later when Risaka's razor fangs bore down upon him. Thin as he was, Izuku barely managed to slip between the gap in the teeth, and stabbed the kiba up into the roof of Risaka's mouth, piercing its brain. The snake died instantly, but its momentum sent its corpse crashing into Izuku, bringing both to the floor. In the resulting tumble, something pierces Izuku's arm, and he cries out in anguish. It tears deep, carving muscle and separating arteries. His side becomes uncomfortably warm, and the scent of iron fills the air. I'm bleeding. The realization hits him like a punch in the gut, and he can't breathe. My blood. His pulse races, forcing more and more ichor to flow out onto the concrete. Ding. Alarm. A harmful substance has been detected in your body. 3, 2, 1. Cure poison has activated. Effect, poison is fading. Alarm. You have defeated Swamp's ruler, Blue Poison Fangs Risaka. Alarm. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. Message. Your rewards for defeating Swamp's ruler, Blue Poison Fangs Risaka, have arrived. Would you like to accept? The slew of screens gave him something else to focus on, and Izuku would be forever thankful for that moment of clarity. It granted him the fortitude he needed to plant his feet against the roof of the corpse's mouth, and shove it off him, screaming as the fang was pulled out of his arm. He'd leveled up while the tooth was still in his arm, so it couldn't close the wound, but he didn't feel quite so lightheaded anymore. Except, he rasps. He needs to ignore the crimson staining the floor beneath his feet, or he'll have a mental breakdown. Item, Risaka's Venom. Item class, A. Type, Potion. A pouch that contains Risaka's purified venom. Obtainable by defeating Risaka. Drinking it will give the player hardened skin, at the cost of decreased strength. Effect, permanent, buff Risaka's steel scales. Minus 20% physical damage. Effect, permanent, debuff, weaken muscles. Minus 35 strength. Item, Risaka's Fang, 2. Item class, C. Type, Dagger. Attack, plus 25. A dagger made from Risaka's fangs. Able to paralyze due to leftover poison. Grants, bleed effect. Can be equipped, stored, or sold. Effect, paralyze. A chance to make enemies unable to move. Effect, bleed. A chance to make enemies lose 1% HP per second. Wait, cure poison? Since when did I have a skill like that? Another screen pops up, as if the system is answering his question. Passive, skill, longevity. All diseases, poisons, and status effects are healed, and sleeping exponentially increases regeneration. Izuku pulled the sack of venom out of his inventory. So, if all status effects are healed, then shouldn't the debuff from this thing be removed? He wonders. After a moment of thoughtful silence, the teen shrugs. Only one way to find out, he mutters, and drains the pouch. It tastes a bit sour, but it goes down easily enough. A harmful substance has been detected in your body. 3, 2, 1. Cure poison has activated. Debuff, weaken muscles is fading. Good thing that worked, or I would have been left with -2 strength, Izuku chuckled nervously. Now, what are these daggers? He pulled the weapons out of his inventory, examining them closely. They were, in a word, beautiful. The handles looked to be made for him, easily molding into his palms, and despite the smooth, scaly texture, they were incredibly comfortable and had a lot of grip. The blades glinted menacingly in the malfunctioning lights of the dungeon, serrated towards the base, and growing into a wicked curved point at the tip. It also extended down over his knuckles a fair amount. Izuku flipped them into an ice-pick grip and tightened his fists around the hilts, settling into a lowered stance. He straightened up a moment later. Yeah, I could get used to these. Alarm. The boss has been slain. The instant dungeon will revert to normal. The ceiling cracked open and began peeling back, revealing clean floor and ceiling tiles. The water and weeds disappeared, as did Risaka's corpse, and the Muzurifu station that Izuku knew replaced the dingy site. He didn't think he'd ever be able to see it the same way again. The teen was lucky nobody was here at the moment. Izuku glanced down at his wounded right arm. It barely even stung, but the sleeve of his mint green tracksuit was ripped and completely stained red. Not that the rest of him wasn't looking too hot either. He forced back a wave of nausea and quickly hurried up the steps, exiting the station. On the surface, he found the answer to his questions. A man with a gigantification quirk was rampaging down the street. Izuku vaguely recognized him from earlier in the week. Isn't that the guy Mount Lady subdued for her debut? Something was different, though. He was more wild, more violent. It looked like he was even bigger than last time, and his skin was some shade of purple-black. A quirk mutation? Or that trigger drug that was going around? Probably the latter, if the unhinged look in the man's eye as he crushed the side of a building in his massive fists, then threw the rubble in the direction of the heroes on scene was any indication. Kamui Woods used his arbor to pull him out of the way, while Death Arms hunkered down behind his powerful arms. Mount Lady, who was behind the villain, tried going in for a canyon cannon, but the villain caught her by the ankle and swung her over his head like a rag doll, sending her crashing into a building and completely demolishing it. If this guy's not stopped soon, a lot of people are gonna be hurt. They might have evacuated the surrounding area, but it's basically a race against time. If the heroes can't keep him contained until backup arrives. Ding! Message. Quest, be a hero, has arrived. Izuku blinked. What, now? Open quest. Quest directions. Be a hero. Goal. Incomplete, help the heroes take down the villain before more people get hurt. Warning, failure to complete this quest will result in civilians dying. A chill ran down Izuku's spine. Did the system create this situation? Or is just taking advantage of it? He couldn't rule out either possibility. Not when the system had the power to create pocket dimensions and form items and monsters out of nothing. Izuku shook his head. Whatever the case, I can't just leave this alone. I'm not a pro, so I might get arrested if I intervene. It's technically not vigilantism if I don't have a quirk, but that's not something I want to test. I have to help without being seen. He glanced around, looking for something, anything, that he could use. His new daggers would be useless because of the range constrictions. His eyes fell upon the thick chunks of concrete littering the ground. It might work. He jogged over and scooped up a piece of rubble about the size of his head. It was surprisingly light, though maybe that was just his 36 strength talking. He'd leveled up 3 times for killing Risaka. Izuku reared back, clenching the muscles in his arms, but careful not to pulverize his cement baseball. Maybe I'm just imagining it, or maybe it's sense, but this guy's nowhere near as tough as Risaka. He threw the chunk, and it whistled through the air, before impacting with the giant villain's forehead with the force of a tank round. The huge man went down like a house of cards, and the hero stared in shock for a solid few seconds. By the time the police officers began searching for whoever interfered, Izuku had slipped away, jogging back home. Maybe I did get a bit stronger. Inko knocked on her son's door. It was Monday morning, and he had to get ready for school, but she hadn't heard any noises indicating that he was awake. Izuku, she called. I'm coming in. She twisted the knob, then froze in the doorway. There, on the floor, was her son doing push-ups like no tomorrow. Sweat dripped from him constantly, pooling on the floor and seeping into the tiles. Izuku, she asked hesitantly, barely recognizing the ripped teen in front of her. 1 second, he grunted, burning through another 10 reps, before finally getting up. He hissed out a heated breath of exertion. Yeah, Mom, he asked, turning to her, revealing his marble-carved six-pack and chiseled pecs. It looked like he'd grown more than a handful of centimeters, as well. Inko had lost a lot of her stature over the years as she gained weight, so it was no surprise when Izuku surpassed her in height, but even then, he'd been such a small boy. Before, the top of her head measured with the bottom of his nose. Now, if she looked straight, she was only eye level with his suddenly broad chest. Was puberty really this dramatic for kids these days? Inko's lips thinned into a line. I was going to say it's time to get ready for school, but I think we need to get you new clothes. Izuku glanced down, noting how the ankle of the sweatpants he'd worn to sleep only came up to his mid-calf. He chuckled. Ah, yeah. I already sold off most of my hero merchandise, though, so you don't have to worry about paying for it. I'll take care of it after school. He'd also gotten a pretty penny from crafting more kibas with his remaining Riken fangs, then selling them to the store, but she didn't need to know that. No, I'll take care of it. Go shower, try to find something that fits, and then we'll go to the store. I'm going to call the school and tell them you'll be absent another day due to unforeseen circumstances. The two shared a small smile. And if Izuku slipped a few thousand yen into his mother's purse when they were done shopping, well, she'd pretend not to notice. Just this once. After all, it was nice to spend more time with her baby. Tuesday was awkward, to say the least. With his new stature, the other students at Arudara Junior High noticed Izuku more easily, but because of it, they also suddenly seemed a bit too shy to approach him. Izuku wondered if it was because he was missing for the last week, and they weren't sure what to say, but the reality of it was that they weren't even sure who he was. Is that a transfer student? Was there always such a hot guy in this school? Who the heck is that? Many were shocked when the seemingly new student entered the classroom and made a beeline for Midoriya Izuku's desk. Izuku, meanwhile, wasn't paying the slightest bit of attention to his peers. He dropped into his chair with a sigh. Written all over the wooden surface was the usual graffiti, though it seemed to have gotten more explicit and vulgar due to him not being there for them to say it to his face. Looks like I'll have to ask the janitor for cleaning supplies during lunch break. If I'm lucky, maybe he won't try to spill them on me again. Caustic burns suck. He pulled out his notebook, then tied his hair back with the scrunchie he borrowed from his mother. His hair had grown along with his body, and the new weight made it hang over his face. The tickling was annoying, but he actually kinda liked how it looked, so he followed his mother's suggestion and pulled into a loose ponytail. Materials on his desk, Izuku was ready for class. At least, until Bakugo entered the room. The two made eye contact, and a second later, the blonde was stomping across the room. Oi, fucking Deku, you think you're hot shit? I didn't fucking ask you to risk your dumbass life to try and help me. You didn't even do shit. All Might had to step in to save your worthless self. And why the fuck do you look so different after disappearing for a week? You crawl into some hole and pump up on steroids so you could feel better about yourself? Huh, you talking trigger or something, you fucking freak. Izuku blinked. It looked like his bully had been sitting on that for a while, otherwise he wouldn't have shouted something like that in the middle of the crowded classroom. Verbal abuse, yes, but admitting that Izuku had interfered in the slime villain attack? Not on his life. Trigger wouldn't do anything for me, since I don't have a quirk, Izuku replied, sounding a bit confused. Surely Bakugo knew that? Although, Izuku didn't quite know if that was really true anymore. Did the system technically count as a quirk? No, it was more like an awakening. King talking to you, you shitty Deku, Bakugo's voice filtered in, breaking Izuku out of his trance. Don't fucking ignore me, he roared, slamming his palm down on the green-haired teen's notebook. At least, he would've, if Izuku had slapped his own hand on it first, taking the explosion without a flinch instead. Looks like Risaka's steel scales is working as intended. Can you please stop blowing up my notebooks? Izuku asked, irritation coloring his voice. The price really starts to add up after a while. I won't be able to afford new school supplies for next year if I keep on having to replace the stuff I have now. That was a little white lie. If Izuku ran 1 or 2 more dungeons, he'd have more than enough funds, but he'd grown up poor, so he understood the value of smart spending and saving money in case of emergencies. Just because he'd come upon a bit of a windfall didn't mean he was going to throw his common sense away and start shopping like a maniac. Alright, please settle down, the teacher said. He'd up at the podium for a minute or two, shuffling through papers, and was finally ready to start class. Of course, he hadn't batted an eye at Bakugo looming over Izuku's seat like a thug. Izuku felt his eyebrow twitch. Bakugo clicked his teeth. This ain't over, damned nerd, he growled, sauntering back to his desk. Izuku rolled his eyes. Walking back home from school, Izuku was looking over his status. I don't have enough time in the morning to finish my run, so I'll need to fit that in before I start my homework, he muttered absent-mindedly. It's become a lot easier now that my strength is higher. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Level, 18. Job, none. Title, Wolf Slayer. HP, 1885. MP, 180. Physical damage reduction, 20%. Strength, 36. Agility, 27. Vitality, 27. Intelligence, 27. Sense, 27. Remaining points, 3. He'd neglected to allocate the points from yesterday's daily quest, since he felt the balance was starting to become a bit too skewed. I'm a bit worried. My body is changing too much for it to be normal, so it must be because I'm putting so many points into strength. If I keep going like this, an image appeared in his head, of an Izuku with bulging muscles, like biceps bigger than his own head, and shivered. God, I hope that doesn't happen, he groaned, shaking his head to clear it of that disturbing depiction. I should probably keep it balanced with agility, since that seems to keep my muscles more streamlined, which allows me to move faster. Speed is good. In most cases, speed is even better than strength, especially since I have Risaka's fangs now. I don't have to rely on just my fists. As long as I can reach my enemy's vital points, I'll have the upper hand in a fight, and agility will definitely help with that. But, if I encounter another opponent like Risaka, with a body harder than I can pierce, then strength will definitely help me to drive my daggers in with more force. Yeah, I'll keep them at roughly the same. He put yesterday's points into agility, bringing it up to 30. He'd do the same with today's 3 points. Vitality increases HP and defense, which is good. At 27, and in conjunction with the damage reduction from Risaka's venom, I can already pretty much ignore Bakugo's weaker blasts. They used to burn me pretty badly before, but that one earlier only took, like, 5 HP. Since I don't have many ranged options, I'll have to stick with close-range combat, and being able to take a hit will definitely keep me alive longer. With sense, though, my reflexes and reaction time will increase enough that I'll be able to dodge most attacks. But what happens if I encounter something that uses AoE attacks? I won't always be to avoid everything, so vitality and sense are both equally important. Strength and agility are priority 1, while vitality and sense are priority 2. Now, what to do about intelligence? It doesn't seem to really affect my mental capacity. Despite it doubling from what it was in the beginning, my mind isn't clearer. I'm not making connections faster, my memory isn't better. It seems to be more connected to magic than anything. I have MP, so maybe in the future I'll be able to learn spells or something, but for right now, do I really need it? He took a look at his skills. There were only 4 at the moment. Longevity, passive skill. All diseases, poisons, and status effects are healed, and sleeping exponentially increases regeneration. Unyielding spirit. Passive skill. Activates when HP is below 30%. Damage taken is reduced by 50% when active. Advanced dagger arts. Passive skill. Attacks with daggers do 33% more damage. Sprint. Active skill. Movement speed increases by 30%. Consumes 1 MP per second. I haven't really used sprint yet, but it seems pretty useful. It's the only thing I have that uses MP, though, and with 180 MP, I can hold it for 3 minutes straight. At 27 intelligence, it looks like my MP regen rate is 11 every 18 seconds, so by the time the initial burst is done, I'll have regained another 110, so it's actually a bit longer. However, most fights won't last that long, I don't think. Only if I'm using hit-and-run tactics. His muttering slowly came to a halt, and he scrubbed a hand through his hair, frustrated. Ugh, I don't know. Fuck it. There's 5 stats, and 5 days in the working week. Monday's points can go into strength, Tuesday to agility, Wednesday for vitality, Thursday for sense, and Friday for intelligence. Then Saturday for strength again, and Sunday for agility. Good enough? Of course you're muttering to yourself even when you're alone, you sack of shit, a harsh voice spat from behind him. Izuku whirled around, and came face to face with the person who was once his best friend. Back before he was diagnosed quirkless. Before he became worthless. Bakugu, he replied flatly. Bakugu's face froze, before twisting into the most disgusted sneer he'd ever witnessed. The fuck did you just call me? The blonde asked lowly. Izuku raised a brow. I said, Bakugu repeated, the fuck did you just call me? It's your name. Did you forget? Bakugu exploded forward, propelled by his quirk, and grabbed the collar of Izuku's Gakuren, dragging him down into a hunch so they were eye to eye. I don't ever want to hear my name come out the mouth of trash like you. Got it, scum? Got it, Izuku murmured. Bakugu didn't want him to call him Bakugu, and Izuku didn't want to call him Kaken, innocent, slightly rough, young Kaken, who just wanted to be a hero. So, he wouldn't call the arrogant blonde anything at all. What do you want, then? Bakugu shoved him back a step, then slammed a punch into his open palm, igniting a cloud of smoke. You've really been getting on my nerves today. You think you're suddenly all that just 'cause you got a bit taller, huh? It looks like I need to do my civic duty and put you in your place, you fucking side character. He threw a punch, and hit nothing but air. Bakugu blinked. Wadash? His head whipped side to side, but there was no sign of the green-haired teen. He had vanished. Almost like a shadow. I'm home, Izuku called as he entered the apartment. He sighed tiredly. His body was in peak condition, but he was mentally exhausted. Today had been rather trying, and it was all because of Bakugu. For someone who claimed to not want anything to do with Izuku, he sure did his best to seek him out. And he calls me a stalker. Izuku snorted at the irony. Would the blonde have followed him all the way home? Maybe. In fact, he wouldn't be surprised if the bully knocked on his door this instant, demanding him to come out and take his beating without complaint, or something like that. It had been ridiculously easy to flip over the teen while his arm was extended, then sprint down an alleyway before he even noticed his prey had escaped. Izuku turned the corner, and came across a strange sight in the living. Welcome home, Izuku, Inko panted when she noticed him standing in the hall. She was wearing blue tights under a pink leotard, purple sweatbands wrapped around her wrists and forehead. She was doing some sort of stretch with tiny weights in her hand, following the movements of the lady on the TV. Mom, yes, honey, what are you wearing? Inko frowned. These are my workout clothes, she said, as if they explained everything. No, Izuku choked out. No, her eyebrows furrowed. What do you mean? There's nothing wrong with it, she said defensively. Mom, I love you, but you look ridiculous. Just wear sweatpants and a t-shirt. Or invest in a tracksuit. Also, what the hell kind of workout were you even doing? It's Zumba, she chirped. Izuku slapped a palm to his face, a dull, meaty thud echoing through the living room. Just, no, come on, go change, then we're going for a run. Inko crossed her arms moodily. Fine, she muttered, not protesting. Considering how her son turned out, he probably knew what he was talking about. Stuff like Zumba isn't really gonna work right now, okay? That's only to tone your muscles. It doesn't help much for actually slimming down. Only high-intensity workouts can burn the calories required to lose weight, and eating properly. Less carbs, more leafy greens and protein. Ah, but that means we can't have Katsudon that much anymore. 'Cause of the breadcrumbs, he moaned mournfully. Izuku, Inko gasped, barely keeping up with her son's insanely long stride. Izuku glanced at her, and paled at the way her face was drooping from exhaustion. Oh, shit, sorry, I wasn't paying attention, he cried, looping an arm over Inko's shoulder to keep her from falling over. It's okay, Inko panted. Just need to sit. Ah, it's actually not a good idea for you to stop moving so suddenly, Izuku said apologetically, giggling at the betrayed look on his mother's face. Let's keep walking for a little bit to cool down. Raise your arms and put your hands behind your head, yeah, like that. Your diaphragm has more space to expand that way, so you'll be able to take in more oxygen. Remember, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Oh, I hope nobody sees me like this, Inko said. I haven't shaved my underarms in a while. Mom, Izuku complained, scrunching his face up. Inko chuckled. Hey, I had to change your poopy diaper hundreds of times, mister. You can't complain if I talk about my hairy armpits. They made identical expressions of disgust, before breaking down into laughter. It felt good. Time passed. Izuku continued working out with Inko, both of them improving because of it. Occasionally, Izuku would get a dungeon key from the random box he got as a reward for the daily quest. They were either E or D rank, and Izuku only gained 2 or 3 levels from each, but it was better than nothing. Plus, it was a great way to get combat experience, and learn to fight different types of enemies. He also made a fair bit of money from selling off the drops. Thus far, he'd completed a goblin cave, a shogun's palace, there were ninjas, for some reason, and he'd acquired a runestone that gave him the stealth skill from the samurai boss, and a dense forest, filled with wolves and bears. The multi-headed bear boss dropped the bloodlust skill runestone. Stealth. Active, skill. All traces of you will be hidden. Costs 200 MP to activate. Costs 10 MP per second to maintain. Bloodlust. Active, skill. Using overwhelming pressure, the selected target is put in a state of terror for 1 minute. Several targets can be selected. Effect. Fearful, all stats minus 50%. Costs 100 MP to activate. Level, 26. HP, 3625. MP, 350. Strength, 62. Agility, 53. Vitality, 44. Intelligence, 44. Sense, 44. Remaining points, 0. Today was a bit different. Izuku stared at the gray key in his hand, trepidation and excitement warring within him. A C-rank dungeon, huh? Item, dungeon key. Item class, C. Type, dungeon key. A key that allows you to create an instant dungeon. You may use this at the tunnel under the bridge. That place? His grip on the key unconsciously tightened. He hadn't been there since his awakening. With his newfound physical ability, it was child's play to scale a building and leap across the rooftops, making it home faster and faster with each week. Free-running his way over Muzurafu also helped a lot with coordination. As a result, he hadn't seen a need to go back to that wretched place again. Now, it seemed like the system was forcing him to face his past. I hope this doesn't become a thing. The thought of returning to the Karthanon temple made Izuku flinch, and he had to place a hand on a nearby wall, leaning against it heavily while images of a sea of blood flickered past his eyes. Eventually, the flashback passed, and he was left breathing heavily on the side of the street. Fuck, I thought I was over that, Izuku grumbled, straightening up and wiping the cold sweat off his forehead. He still couldn't stand the sight of his own blood. It always sucked him back to that horrible day where he lost his sanity. Well, for now, I might as well go clear this dungeon, he mumbled, pocketing the key and jogging in the direction of that familiar tunnel. He didn't notice the bird that had fallen on the road behind him, dead from a stopped heart. Alarm. You have entered an instant dungeon. Izuku dug a flashlight out of his inventory, flicking the device on. It peeled back the darkness, revealing a series of caves in all directions. Seeing no monsters in the immediate vicinity, he began walking forward, following his sense, which pointed him in the direction of a malevolent presence. Minutes passed in silence, and Izuku's paranoia was being amped up every second. He started glancing down every tunnel he passed, of which there were many, observing each for a few moments, before moving on to the next. Where are all the monsters? He murmured nervously. The hairs on his arms were raised in anticipation. Then, he heard it. The scuttling of something hard tapping against the stone. Above, his head whipped up, flashlight following suit. There, hanging over him, were hundreds, no, maybe thousands of ants clinging to the walls, the multitude of eyes glowing in the darkness. Izuku shivered violently. That's so fucking gross. Then the insects descended. Ew, ew. Izuku groaned, flicking green bug goop off his cobalt blue tracksuit. He hadn't been able to find a green one in his new size. God, this is disgusting. An hour or two had passed, and it felt like he was making no progress through the underground labyrinth. Ever since the first swarm appeared, it was like the floodgates had opened, and wave after wave of ants had rushed him from all directions. Their mandibles could barely pierce his skin, thanks to Risaka's steel scales, but it seriously creeped him out to feel them crawling on him. Fortunately, they were pretty weak, only about E rank in strength individually. The numbers were only an issue because he had to kill more of them, which was a real pain, but he soldiered on, leaving hundreds of insect corpses in his wake. Due to how weak they were, he'd only leveled up once. So much for a C-rank dungeon, he growled, vertically bisecting another ant's skull with Risaka's fang. I hope the boss is stronger than this. Hoping to avoid the next group, he activated sprint and exploded into motion, rushing down halls and simply ignoring any more mobs he came across. The network of caves passed by in a blur, and soon, he came upon a hall that was covered in some sort of white, silky fabric, which a few ants were cocooned in. Webbing. Oh, please don't be a spider boss, Izuku prayed. Giant arachnid Bariua. Motherfucker. It was massive, even bigger than Risaka. Maybe not longer, but it could definitely compare. 8 crimson legs, curled up to its bulbous thorax. Izuku counted 12 scarlet eyes, glowing like flood lamps. Its fangs were longer than Izuku was tall. There was some mercy in the heavens, though, because it was currently asleep. Probably tired after gorging itself on all those ants, Izuku decided, remembering the trail of half-mangled cadavers he'd passed on his way. All those eyes means it's got a pretty wide field of vision, so getting into a blind spot will be difficult. Arachnids are arthropods. It'd take too much effort to pierce its exoskeleton, but the joints aren't covered in the chitin. Instead of the eyes, I should aim for the legs. If it can't move, it can't really fight back. Izuku nodded, mind set on his plan of attack. He'd only have one chance at this. He adjusted, then readjusted his grip on his dual daggers, inhaling and exhaling deeply to center himself. Unbeknownst to the teen, his emerald eyes began glowing with a fierce light. Sprint activated. Movement speed increased by 30%. Leaping off the ground so hard the stone under his feet cracked, Izuku landed on the spider's frontmost left leg, wasting no time in cleaving through the exposed soft spot with a Risaka's fang, before reaching towards the next and repeating the process. In an instant, he'd amputated all 4 left legs, and the boss finally woke up. With a horrific shriek, the thing rolled over on its web, forcing Izuku to jump away before he caught tangled in the sticky threads. 12 scarlet eyes glared hatefully at Izuku, but he ignored the pressure that tried, and failed, to overwhelm him. This thing's on another level from Risaka and those other D-rank bosses, but it's got nothing on that guy. Compared to the Lord of the Karthanon Temple, a huge arachnid was just a nuisance. Bariua's mouth opened wide, a thick, salivating tongue poking out and wriggling threateningly in Izuku's general direction. It was, unexpectedly, followed by a stream of acid. Izuku backstepped a few feet, watching as the corrosive liquid ate through the cave floor. A crackling sound caught his attention once more, and when he looked up at the boss, still clinging to its web, he saw the top of its exoskeleton was breaking. What is it dash? Like a scene from a horror movie, Bariua's back opened up, and out emerged a completely whole spider, all 8 legs waving wildly as the monster got its bearings. It can heal by molting? That's bullshit. Izuku avoided a few more acid blasts, before Bariua finally dropped to the ground, which Izuku had been waiting for. It was too dangerous to go up there and risk getting stuck. He sprinted forward, weaving past the lightning-quick jabs of the boss' 2 forelegs, and scaling another limb that slammed into the ground right next to him, quickly planting his feet firmly on Bariua's broad back. The monster screeched furiously, shaking its body and trying to dislodge its passenger, but Izuku used all his force to dig Risaka's fangs through the hard chitin, impaling the monster and activating the dagger's special effects. Effect, paralysis, has activated. The enemy's resistance is too high. Effect, cancelled. Effect, bleed, has activated. The enemy's resistance is too high. Effect, cancelled. Izuku snarled in aggravation. TCH, looks like I'll need to either weaken it more, or hit a vital point. He allowed himself to go flying, flipping in the air to land on his feet, then sidestepping the sharp claws attempting to cut him to pieces. Sense was working in overdrive to keep him alive, and he pushed forth with all his agility, quickly lopping off both forelegs at the second of their 3 joints. Berryua hissed scathingly, spitting a veritable river of acid, but Izuku jumped high over it, landing on the spider's face. Activating his strength with such intensity that all the muscles in his arms tightened from the strain, he jammed his daggers deep into his opponent's glowing eyes with a spray of orange blood. Effect: paralysis has activated. The enemy will be unable to move for 1 minute. Effect: bleed has activated. The enemy will lose 1% HP every second. Yanking Risaka's fangs free, Izuku stabbed down again, and again, and again, stacking the debuffs and thoroughly carving up Berryua's disgusting face. Due to the effects of paralysis, it didn't even squeal as the damage finally took its toll, and the boss dropped to the floor, dead. Alarm. You have defeated Giant Arachnid Berryua. Alarm. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. Alarm. You have learned a new skill. Vital Strike. Active skill. Aiming for weak spots deals 200% damage. Dagger only. Costs 70 MP to activate. Alarm. You have earned the title, Bug Squasher. Title, Bug Squasher. A. Title, given to a hunter proficient in defeating bugs. 40% increased stats when fighting against insect-type monsters. Alarm. The boss has been slain. The instant dungeon will revert to normal. A moment later, and Izuku was standing back in the tunnel under the bridge. No drops, he moaned mournfully. Oh well, least I leveled up 3 times. God, if I never see another insect-type monster again, it'll be too soon. He shivered in disgust. That dungeon was getting locked away in his trauma box, right next to the time Dr. Tsubasa had callously told him to give up on hoping for a quirk. Wonder what happened to him and his grandson. Izuku shrugged. It wasn't really his business. He was more concerned with getting home and washing the bug goop off him. Izuku discovered that he actually liked running. So, when the screen popped up like it normally did to inform him that he'd finished the daily quest, he waved it away and went back into his mindless trance, where he relied more on his sense than his sight to not run into anything. Summer break had started a few days ago, and since then, Izuku found himself with quite a bit of free time. He'd already finished his summer homework, and he hadn't gotten another dungeon key within the last 2 weeks, so he was reduced to trying to find ways to fill his day. He'd left his mother back at the 4-kilometer mark, while she did some calisthenics and stretches. She'd come a long way, and Izuku was so proud of her for sticking to the workout schedule. An hour later, Izuku finally slowed to a stop, breathing just a little bit heavier than normal. The daily quest screen popped up once more, but this time, it wasn't just to inform Izuku of its completion. Quest directions. Daily quest, preparing to become strong. Goal. Complete, push UPS, 100 out of 100. Complete, sit UPS, 100/100. Complete, squats, 100/100. Complete, running, 20/10 kilometer. Izuku blinked. Why'd it keep tracking after I finished? Does that mean I can go beyond the original parameters? He tilted his head thoughtfully. His mom usually went back to the apartment while he finished his run, and it wasn't like he had anything else to do. So, he dropped to the asphalt and began cranking out another 100 push-ups. Alarm. A hidden quest has been discovered. Daily quest, preparing to become strong, has been replaced by daily quest, preparing to become the strongest. Message. Your rewards for completing the daily quest have arrived. Quest rewards. Claim your rewards. 1. Status recovery. 2. Stat points +6. 3. Blessed random box +1. 3. Cursed random box +1. The stat points doubled. It said that the daily quest was replaced by this version, so does that mean I'll get 6 points every day now? Izuku was, understandably, shocked. He was already improving at a ludicrous pace, just from the first tier of the daily quest. Between this new version and his ability to level up in system-provided dungeons, his growth potential was terrifying. Why are there 2 boxes for the 3rd reward, though? Can I only pick one? Blessed random box? A white cube dropped in his hand, topped with a gold ribbon. Item, Blessed random box. Item class, not applicable. Type, item box. A unique random box that gives the player something they want. Something I want? Well, I want to be a pro hero, so maybe it'll give me an official hero license, he joked, opening it. Item, Hell's Gate key. Item class, S. Type, dungeon key. A key that allows one to open Hell's Gate and gain access to the Demon Monarch's castle. Can be used at the entrance to Might Tower in Tokyo. Izuku stared at the jagged crimson key in his hand, blinked, tossed it in his inventory. I think the fuck not. He turned on his heel and began the long run home. That night, Izuku was rolling around in his bed restlessly. Why did it give me a friggin' S-rank dungeon key? I wanted something that could help me become a hero, not a literal one-way ticket to hell. He gurgled anguishedly, yanking at his hair like a madman. A knock at his door stopped him from raving anymore. Izuku? Are you alright? His mother asked hesitantly. It sounded like her son was having a mental breakdown, and he totally was. Yeah, Izuku responded after a moment, allowing himself to go limp in his sheets. Sorry, you can go back to bed, Mom. Okay, Inko said, not fully believing him, but willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Good night, baby. I love you. Love you too, Mom. Izuku rolled over, burying his face in his pillow, attempting to either suffocate himself or drift off to blissful unconsciousness. Whichever came first, really. It happened near the end of summer break, as Izuku was departing yet another goblin den. Alarm. The player has reached the required level. Message. Quest, job change quest, has arrived. A job, huh? I've been wondering about that, Izuku muttered, tapping his chin thoughtfully. Except, a key flashed into existence in his hand. Item, job change quest dungeon key. Item class? Type, dungeon key. A key that allows one to access the instant dungeon to begin the job change quest, can be used anywhere. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed. Unknown rank? That doesn't sound good. I really hope this isn't another S-rank dungeon. I might actually die. But, this isn't an opportunity one can pass up right now. I've already put the demon monarch's castle on hold. At this rate, I might end up stagnating. The very thought made him grimace. He only had 10 months since his awakening to catch up with the people who've had their quirks for more than a decade. If he slowed down his constant pace of leveling up now, he'd never make it to UA. He glanced up at the darkening sky. It's getting late, though. Tomorrow, he decided, heading back home. In the morning, Izuku stood in a clearing in the forest, dressed in his normal blue tracksuit top and black joggers. He was a bit of a walk away from the park. The sun had only risen an hour or two ago, but Izuku's anxiety forced him out of bed after a night spent tossing and turning. He turned the black key over in his hand a few times, palms sweating. Message. Daily quest, preparing to become the strongest, has arrived. Izuku waved it away. The daily quest always came in at 7 in the morning, but he wouldn't take all day to finish the job change quest. He had time. Sighing loudly, the green-haired teen pushed the key into the air, summoning the pocket dimension. Oddly enough, this gate was purple, while all the others had been blue. Izuku just chalked it up to this being a special event dungeon. He forced his way through the gate, trying to ignore the feeling like he'd just woken something that was better left asleep, and stepped into the torchlit halls of what seemed to be a European-style castle. Standing a few meters in front of him was a lone knight, a two-handed broadsword grasped firmly in its hand. Once the gate closed behind Izuku, the knight lumbered forward slowly. It was a pattern Izuku had noticed in the dungeons. He'd always have a small attack force thrown at him first. It was almost as if the system was giving him a chance to analyze the opponents in a low-stakes environment, before the difficulty was ramped up. Izuku, obviously, was going to milk that opportunity for all it was worth. Bulky armor, giant weapon, slightly jilted movements. Neither fast nor flexible, likely relies on pure power. Might be able to swing that sword pretty quick in a straight line on account of its strength, but it won't have anywhere close to my mobility. Defense is probably its best attribute. Izuku darted forward, lashing out with a Rasaka's fang, only for the blade to slip right off the metal plate. He backstepped instantly, easily avoiding the sword that cleaved the air in front of him, then leaned forward and jammed his dagger into the space between the knight's helmet and chest plate. Nothing. No resistance, no blood, and no visible sign that it did any damage to the knight. It swung its hefty broadsword again, this time forcing Izuku to put more distance between them. The teen stowed his knives away in his inventory. They'd be useless here. Rasaka's fangs didn't even scratch that armor, and it doesn't seem like there's anything underneath. Puppetry? Or spirits controlling the suit? Well, that part doesn't matter. There's a surprising lack of force behind its swings, though, and they're so wide. It's like this guy doesn't even know how to fight, other than pointing the sharp end at his opponent. Izuku jumped over a horizontal slash, planting his feet on the knight's shoulders and gripping the helmet between his palms, ripping it clean off with just a bit of effort. He was feeling a bit better about this quest, now that it was revealed how simplistic the enemies were. This definitely isn't an S-rank dungeon. Probably not A or B, even. A high C, if I'm being generous. Now that the first enemy was dead, and it didn't seem like more would be appearing without him going deeper, Izuku took the time to read the messages that popped up when he entered the castle. Alarm. You cannot leave the instant dungeon until you have defeated the boss. Alarm. In this area, your potion and shop ability is restricted. Leveling up will not provide status recovery. Natural regeneration is disabled. Izuku frowned. those handicaps are a bit harsh, considering how weak that night was. Is it really going to get that much harder as I progress? Maybe it's too early to determine the difficulty. That was only the first monster. He scratched his nose idly. This just became a lot more risky, he muttered, quickly collecting the rewards for slaying the knight. Laborious clanking footsteps echoed down the hall, more empty suits of armor approaching. Izuku whirled around and bolted at them, taking the initiative. He slammed his fist into the chest plate of the one at the front, cratering the metal and sending it flying back with so much force it crashed into another knight behind it. They disappeared down the hall. A moment later, he received the notification that they'd both been killed. Izuku blinked. Damn, 200 strength is crazy. Name, Midoriya Izuku. Job, none. Title, Wolf Slayer. Fatigue, 37. Level, 40. HP, 11,800. MP, 1,190. Physical damage reduction, 20%. Strength, 202. Agility, 190. Vitality, 127. Intelligence, 128. Sense, 122. Remaining points, 0. Item, High Knight's Chestplate. Item class, B. Type, Armor. Plus 7% physical damage reduction. Plus 10 vitality. Slows movement speed if strength is below 80. Izuku held the breastplate in his hand, turning it over to examine the curves of the metal and the leather underlayer. Haven't gotten armor before, he noted, equipping it. At the bottom of the 2D representation of his character, an option popped up, allowing him to disable the design of his chest plate. He activated it, and watched in slight awe as it slowly vanished from sight. The status screen showed it as still being there, though, and its effects were still active. It's nice that I'm not forced to wear this stuff openly. I'd look pretty ridiculous. He chuckled, imagining stepping into the convenience store wearing a medieval suit of plate mail. With a sharp intake of breath, the teen summoned a Rasaka's fang and stabbed the dagger up into the empty air, feeling resistance despite there being nothing he could see. A moment later, a figure garbed in cloth wrappings faded into view, his knife buried in the underside of its jaw. Assassins. A whoosh from behind had Izuku leaping to the side, spinning around to see a robed monster, holding a staff in one hand, and fire in the other. An arrow whizzed for his face, but Izuku caught it straight out of the air, snapping the shaft in his fist. Magicians and archers, too. Dozens of monsters had suddenly appeared while he was distracted admiring his new drop. Izuku gritted his teeth, cursing his wandering thoughts. So this is why healing was restricted, he growled, punching a knight's helmeted head off. It's like a test of all my abilities. Strength to beat the knights, sense for the assassins, and agility to dodge the archers and magicians. If I try using any skills other than sprint on this many enemies, I'll run out of MP quickly, and since I can't regenerate, I can't afford to take damage. Though he couldn't see it, Izuku also knew his fatigue was going to be rising faster the longer this went on. And considering the amount of monsters packed in the stone halls, he ran a very serious risk of being exhausted by sheer numbers. The odds weren't looking good for him, but Izuku pushed down the sense of dread with ease developed by weeks of practice, and met the tide of enemies. Izuku desperately chugged down a restoration potion that he purchased from the store, which he discovered weren't subjected to the same restrictions as regeneration potions. He watched as his fatigue dropped down to 0, heaving a sigh of relief at the feeling of being well rested once more. He'd leveled up 6 times, and gained quite a few items. Item, High Knight's Gauntlet. Item class, B. Type, Armor. Plus 3% physical damage reduction. Plus 10 vitality. Effect, protects hand from injury. Item, Archer's Glove. Item class, C. Type, Armor. Plus 5 vitality. Item, High Magician's Ring. Item class, B. Type, Accessory. Plus 10 intelligence. Item, Assassin's Boots. Item class, B. Type, Armor. Plus 10 agility. Still, I feel like it isn't enough, Izuku murmured, standing in front of the room to what could only be the boss room. Most of these items are B rank, which puts the difficulty of this dungeon above my initial estimate. This boss, though, is definitely A rank, maybe beyond. He paced the width of the hall back and forth a few times, rubbing his chin pensively. If this is actually an S-rank dungeon, I won't survive. But, I can't back out now. Either I beat this thing and leave, or, no, there's no other option. I have to win, he said resolutely, clenching his fists. Izuku pushed open the doors, and froze. He felt it in his body, beneath his skin, past his bones, penetrating all the way to his soul. A merciless, crushing pressure that promised a violent, cruel demise. Standing before him, between him and an empty throne, stood a crimson omen of death. Blood-red Commander Igris. Blood-red, indeed. Armor, cape, sword, name tag, it was all the same deep maroon color that had flowed like water in the Parthenon temple. The boss strode forward at a deceivingly sedated pace, ponytail bouncing ridiculously behind it, though it did nothing to lessen the sheer amount of danger flowing from it. The commander stood at least a head above Izuku, grotesquely thin, and carried a blade almost as long as the teen was tall by its side. It stalked towards the stock-still boy, who was shivering slightly, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's coming!" The realization snapped Izuku out of his panic, and he only barely squatted beneath the horizontal slash that almost took his head off. Behind him, the air pressure alone cut a gouge along the floor and wall. He didn't even touch it. How strong is this guy? Materializing Rasaka's fangs, Izuku jabbed at the commander's ribs, only for the point to spark against its insanely tough armor. TCH. Of course. If I couldn't even scratch the knights outside, then why would it work on the guy who's so far above them? He caught the overhead strike with a crossguard, shunting aside the longsword and planting a kick into the commander's chest. It rolled backwards, swinging its weapon in a haphazard upward arc as it fell away from Izuku, catching him in the collarbone. It didn't do more than leave a rip in his tracksuit jacket and a nick on his clavicle, but it made Izuku even wearier. This guy's got a lot of experience in battle, even I can tell. His instincts are crazy, too. Who could actually hurt their opponent from that sort of position, regardless if it wasn't that much? The boss came up standing and closed the distance in an instant, and the two began exchanging blows. The Crimson Knight could put more weight behind its blade, but Izuku was by far more agile, and his strength wasn't anything to scoff at. The clanging of metal against metal rang throughout the throne room, eventually deadlocking. One of Rasaka's fangs was pressed up against the commander's sword, while the hand wielding the other had been caught in a red gauntlet. Teen and Knight strained against each other, until Igris angled its blade, and with a twist of its wrist, ripped the knife from Izuku's grip. The commander immediately made to go on the attack with a diagonal slash across Izuku's torso, but the green-haired teen reached out with his now empty left hand and caught the sword, stopping it cold. Thanks to the High Knight's gauntlet, I can do stuff like that now. Deciding to return the favor, Izuku grabbed the blade tightly and ripped it from the surprised knight's clawed fingers, tossing it across the throne room before bringing his hand back to hit Igris with a heavy cross to the helmet. Rather than fighting the motion, Igris twirled around, using the momentum to slam a punishing roundhouse kick into Izuku's side. He definitely felt a few ribs crack, but he pushed through the pain, lunging forward to slug the commander in the stomach, making it double over and mold around his fist. He grabbed the Crimson Knight's head by the ponytail, and tried to knee the boss in the faceplate. Igris stopped Izuku's kneecap with a metal palm, then wrapped the sharp fingers of its other hand around his raised ankle. Straightening up and spinning around, Igris viciously threw Izuku across the throne room, making him crash into a pillar with punishing force, completely demolishing the stone. Winded, the teen crawled to his feet, and immediately leaped to the side to avoid the gleaming sword that stabbed through the dust cloud, aimed for his chest. He took a moment to draw air back into his lungs, observing the knight, who was still in its stance, blade pointed where Izuku was a moment ago. Then, it slowly stood straight, turning to face its opponent. Izuku returned Rasaka's fangs to his inventory with a mental command, raising his fists, ready for another bout. Then, Igris surprised him. The blood-red commander stabbed its longsword into the ground, tossed aside its cape, and unclipped the daggers sheathed to its back. Completely free of weaponry, the knight strode forward, flexing and cracking its clawed knuckles. Is it 'cause I'm not using weapons either? I guess chivalry isn't dead. The little joke made Izuku laugh, but he choked on his chuckle a moment later when Igris closed the gap with astounding speed, aiming for a throat punch. Izuku barely managed to avoid it by leaning to the side, then elbowing aside the follow-up jab to the face, which probably would have broken his nose. Izuku stepped in closer, uppercutting the knight in the jaw, only to receive a cross to the face for his troubles, snapping his head to the side. Rolling his neck, Izuku raised an arm for a block, then retaliated once more. Punch, dodge, block, punch, dodge, block. Over and over, the green-haired teen and the blood-red commander exchanged blows, like it was an MMA match rather than a fight for their life. Izuku swore he'd spit out at least 5 broken teeth, but his opponent's armor was battered, covered in dents shaped suspiciously like Izuku's fist. As exhilarating and painful as it was, though, to be going toe-to-toe with such an obviously powerful opponent, Izuku knew it was time to end it. This guy may be an honorable knight, but I'm definitely not. His next attack was another uppercut, but this time, his hand wasn't clenched into a ball. Instead, it was holding something, a Rasaka's fang, which he stabbed up into Igris' skull, unleashing a waterfall of glowing white blood. Izuku roared in exertion, pushing higher and higher, driving the blade deeper and deeper. Vital Strike, activated. Vital Strike, activated. Vital Strike, activated. Vital Strike, activated. Alarm. Skill, Vital Strike, has leveled up. Alarm. You have slain Blood Red Commander Igris. Alarm. You have leveled up. You have leveled up. Both Izuku and the commander fell to their knees, one exhausted, the other dead. Izuku stared at the corpse of his foe, leaking white blood from the darkness under its helmet, his dagger still buried in its skull. Even now, the Crimson Knight cut a menacing figure. Message. Your rewards for defeating Blood Red Commander Igris have arrived. Would you like to accept? Accept, Izuku panted, exhaling and inhaling heavily in an effort to calm his pounding heart. Item, leather pouch. Type, container. A pouch used to store possessions. Leather pouch has been opened. You have received 1,500 yen. Total yen, 1,940,336 yen. Mom's birthday already passed. Looks like I'll have to wait till Christmas to buy her something nice with this. He'd gotten her a modest green champagne dress that matched her hair. It was noticeably slimmer than her older dresses, a testament to her progress. Izuku had insisted she wear it that night, and he matched her with a simple black suit he'd bought for himself. They'd walked out their apartment, looking like they were going to dine in a fancy 5-star restaurant, only to head over to the W.C. Donald's a few streets down and grab a burger. His mother cried many tears of joy that day. Item, Runestone, Dominator's Touch. Item class, A. Type, Runestone. The E-skill, Dominator's Touch, can be obtained by breaking the runestone. Item, Red Knight's Helmet. Item class, S. Type, Armor. Plus 15% physical damage reduction. Plus 20 vitality. Plus 20 strength. Izuku's eyes widened. Holy shit, he murmured, holding the helm in his hand. He actually was an S-rank boss. He looked upon the dead commander with a bit trepidation, as if the corpse would hop back up and try to continue their fight. When it stayed motionless after 10 seconds, Izuku allowed himself to relax a bit. It's kinda hard to believe, though he was weaker than me, by just a bit. But, the system doesn't lie. So is it just that I'm that strong? It was kinda hard to believe. He'd lived his life believing he was the weakest in the world. 15 years, his birthday passed a few weeks ago, closely following his mother's, of every single person he knew belittling him for being quirkless, and now he could kill an S-rank boss? Maybe he could challenge the demon monarch's castle? Izuku shook his head. No, I shouldn't get ahead of myself. A single S-rank boss is different from a dungeon full of A and S-rank monsters, with a boss that's who knows how powerful. He equipped the helmet, watching with satisfaction as his stats rose a considerable amount, then turned his attention to the runestone. Squeezing the red rock, it shattered, and a notification popped up. Alarm. Skill, Dominator's Touch, has been learned. Dominator's Touch, Level 1. Active, skill. Allows control over objects without touching them. Requires no MP. The teen held his right hand out, focusing on the Rasaka's fang embedded in the blood-red commander's jaw. A swirling, emerald-green aura surrounded his outstretched arm, and then, Dominator's Touch activated. The dagger was ripped free by an invisible force, and zoomed through the air, settling in Izuku's palm gently. It's just like Mom's quirk, Izuku whispered in awe, tears pricking the corners of his eyes. Finally, after 15 years, he'd received his birthright. He quickly swiped at his eyes. Now wasn't the time to cry. He had other concerns at the moment. Item, Hearthstone. Type, consumable. A quest-exclusive item. Breaking the Hearthstone will instantly transport the player outside the instant dungeon. The instant dungeon will be automatically destroyed upon leaving, and the key job change quest will end. Cannot be stored. Normally, when I kill the boss, the instant dungeon breaks on its own. The fact that I've only now gotten the Hearthstone, it's not over yet. As if that was the cue, a swirling monochrome vortex popped into existence, crackling with dark lightning. Then, another appeared, and another, for a total of 3. Alarm. The job change quest will begin. Quest directions. Job change quest. Earn a job by collecting points. Points can be collected by defeating enemies, or surviving for a longer time. Earning more points will give a higher tier job. Midnight. A timer. And it looks like more monsters will be coming through these gates. Izuku glanced at his HP. He was still above 50%, but he didn't know how long it would stay that way. What if there were more mobs on Igris level? He shuddered at the thought. Then, the knight stepped into the broken hallway, and Izuku felt relief. These guys are weak. I can easily take them on, especially after leveling up 2 more times, combined with the stats from my armor. But, I don't have to fight. I can just wait out the clock, with the use of stealth, and give my fatigue a chance to lower. I have 980 MP at the moment. Stealth takes 200 to activate, then uses 10 MP per second. However, due to my high intelligence, I'm regenerating 60 MP every 5 seconds. It's a net gain of 10. I can literally hold stealth forever. Slightly giddy at that astronomical realization, and also making a mental note to abuse stealth at school so Bakugo would stop fucking bothering him as soon as class ended, Izuku vanished from view. Stealth activated. Alarm. Magician is using detection. Stealth has worn off. What? A demonic eye hung over a robed figure, snapping open to reveal a flaming purple pupil, which locked onto Izuku without hesitation. A moment later, the knights closest to him, who had been ambling around in a confused daze, turned sharply and swung their weapons straight at him. Damn it! Izuku growled, hopping over a warhammer and retaliating with a heavy fist, causing the knight's chest plate to implode. Gonna have to get the magicians first. Jumping high into the air, he quickly scanned the room, before locating 5 of the robed figures. He landed on a knight's shoulders, using it as a launch pad to cross half the room in a single pound, diving on the mage and jamming Risaka's fang into the darkness under its hood. Like puppets with their strings cut, dozens of knights fell apart. Izuku gawked at the sudden chaos. What? Why did? That's when he realized, other than casting detection, the magicians weren't actually doing anything. They weren't debuffing him, or he'd receive a notification that his longevity skill had dispelled them. The knights weren't moving any faster, or glowing to signify that they'd been enhanced by a spell, and obviously, they weren't attacking him with fireballs or whatever else they had up their billowing sleeves. Also, each magician was standing next to a swirling gate, pointing their staffs at them, so really, there was only one explanation: summoning magic. It explained why those knights had ceased moving when he'd killed that knight. The magic sustaining them had suddenly disappeared. So, if he killed the rest, then he might actually be able to finish this quest. Izuku pulled free Risaka's fang from the dead mage and jumped into the air, then hurled the dagger through the air with the force of a cannonball, blasting apart another robed monster's head. Alarm. Skill, Dagger Throw, has been learned. Dagger Throw. Active, skill. Throwing a dagger like a projectile does plus 25% damage. Costs 30 MP. Dominator's touch called the weapon back to his palm before he touched back down, and he repeated the maneuver once more. Several suits of armor fell to the ground, the magic holding them up suddenly gone. Izuku couldn't see any more magicians at the moment, but that wasn't an issue, he'd just make them reveal themselves. Stealth activated. Magician is using detection. 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 Stealth has worn off. The demonic eyes hovering overhead separated the robed figures from their armor-clad puppets, and Izuku blurred around the room. Ignore the knights. Kill the magicians, and they'll fall, too. He sniped yet another summoner with dagger throw. Before he could recall his weapon, though, a knight stepped in front of Izuku, raising its longsword with the intent to cut him in half. Izuku changed target, pointing his palm at the immediate threat, and once more activated Dominator's touch. The bright emerald aura wrapped around the helmet of his foe, and Izuku clenched his fist, crushing the steel like a tin can. That's a lot more powerful than simple telekinesis. I'll need to experiment. Risaka's fang flew back into his hand, and Izuku sprinted past another magician, decapitating it. Where are there? The final 3 mages were huddled on the opposite side of the room, kneeling and pressing their hands to the ground. A purple magic circle spawned, and the discarded suits of armor on the ground began shuddering, before being pulled towards the mages. The metal pieces fused and slotted together, forming a massive golem that towered over everything in the room. Exchanging quantity for quality? A good theory, but it doesn't work when the sum is even slower than its parts. Not that the individual knights were able to touch me, anyways. The behemoth lumbered over, slamming its gargantuan fists into the ground with devastating force, the impact thoroughly destroying the stone. Izuku had already skirted past it, however, focused more on the 3 casters. Now, while they're distracted maintaining the spell, you have slain a magician. You have slain a magician. You have slain a magician. A grating clattering noise filled the room as every single knight, golem included, fell apart. Then, silence. Is it over? Izuku asked the quiet room. The timer popped up in front of him. 29 minutes and 16 seconds. All monsters in the room have been slain. The job change quest will now end. The player's performance will be analyzed, and points will be awarded. A job will be awarded based on the amount of points earned. Awarded, huh? Looks like I don't get to choose. Izuku didn't really care, to be honest. As long as he could get stronger, he would take whatever he could get his hands on. Where the player goes, the Reaper follows. The player's path is littered with corpses and the smell of blood. As the player possesses incredible power, He does not leave anything to his allies, and overcomes all challenges with his own 2 hands. Your desire for strength burns strong enough to call those who wander the valley of death, and the army of the dead who follow your commands shall create a path where your word will become law, and you will never need the help of another living being again. Your job is necromancer. Anything except that, Izuku groaned, hands coming up to yank at his hair. Ah, I want to be a hero. What's with this villainous job? I've never even heard of someone with a quirk that lets them raise the dead. This is such shit. Alarm. Will you accept your job? Warning, necromancer is a hidden job. If you refuse, you will never get this chance again. Admittedly, his interest was piqued, so Izuku reluctantly accepted. Well, with this, I'll have incredible physical strength, telekinesis, and the ability to make my own army, like the system said. Some quirks only provide one of the first 2, and rarely, if ever, the third. So, really, I should just look at it as a chance to branch out and develop even more skills. Your job has been chosen. Based on the amount of points earned, the player will be given the chance to advance to a superior rank. All enemies have been slain. Points will be added. You cleared the room faster than expected. Points will be added. You did not use the Hearthstone. Points will be added. Izuku blinked, then dug around in the pocket of his tattered black sweats, pulling out the green stone. I forgot about this thing. He shrugged carelessly. Maybe he'd keep it, it looked pretty cool, after all. Final health is above 50%. Points will be added. The total amount of points has exceeded the feat limit. The darkness in the room began twisting and writhing. You will be promoted from necromancer to. A wave of void suddenly flooded towards a startled Izuku. Shadow Monarch. Shadow Extraction, Level 1. Job, Specific, Skill. A shadow soldier is created by extracting the mana from a body without life. Chance of failure increases the higher the target's stats are, as well as the more time passed since the target's death. Shadows able to be extracted, 0/60. Save Shadow, Level 1. Job, Specific, Skill. Absorb created shadow soldiers to call upon them in the future. Absorbed shadows can be summoned and reabsorbed whenever and wherever the player desires. Shadows saved, 0/40. Please select your command phrase for shadow extraction. Rise. That's it, guys. Thanks for watching and supporting us. See you in the next part.